नमस्कार, मी प्रसन्न जोशी. साम टीव्हीच्या साम टॉक्स या आपल्या खास कार्यक्रमात आपल्या सगळ्यांचं स्वागत. साम टॉक्समध्ये आपण विविध क्षेत्रातल्या मान्यवरांना बोलवत असतो आणि त्यांचे अनुभव जाणून घेत असतो. आज आपल्यासोबत एक खास पाहुणे आहेत. आपल्यासोबत आहेत US कॉन्स्युल जनरल फॉर वेस्टर्न इंडिया रिजन डेव्हिड रॅन्स. डेव्हिड रॅन्स हे एवढ्या महत्त्वाच्या पदावर आहेत आणि तुम्हाला थोडीशी कल्पना आली असेल की जर का आजच्या काळात जर का मी अशा अधिकार पदावरच्या अमेरिकन प्रशासनातल्या अधिकार पदावरच्या व्यक्तीशी बोलणार असेल तर विषय काय असेल? अर्थातच रशिया युक्रेन यांच्यातला संघर्ष, त्यातली भारताची भूमिका, अमेरिकेची भूमिका आणि अमेरिका जो आपला एक अतिशय महत्त्वाचा जवळचा साथीदार आहे, मित्र आहे, त्यांच्या आपल्याकडून असलेल्या अपेक्षा आणि आपल्यासुद्धा याबद्दलचं असलेली भूमिका काय आहे, या सगळ्या विषयांवरती बोलण्यासाठी आपल्यासोबत आहेत स्वतः डेव्हिड रॅन्स. मिस्टर रॅन्स, आय वेलकम यू ऑन दिस टॉक शो साम टॉक्स ऑन साम टीव्ही.
Thank you, Prasanna. It's great to be here today.
Thank you. Mr. Rans, I would like to start this conversation with a basic question. How you assess the current scenario, especially in the pretext of when US President Mr. Biden is saying that we will stop Russia's aggression at all costs, even if it means World War III. Are we really heading towards that severe situation?
Well, I think it's really important, Prasanna, to state clearly what's going on here. President Putin and Russia have invaded a sovereign neighbor. They did it in an unprovoked, unjustified, and premeditated fashion. In so doing, they have unleashed one of the worst humanitarian crises in modern history and caused untold suffering. It is critically important that the world stand up against this aggression. President Biden said it best. He said, now is the time for every world leader to stand up for the Ukrainian people and for the government of Ukraine against this unprovoked aggression of President Putin.
So, but when people are using, or many newspaper organizations, news organizations, including the President Biden himself, when we are using the word World War III, it has many dimensions. I remember the days when the ex-president, the then President Mr. Bush said that we are fighting against the terrorism, who are with us, our friends, and who are not, they are our foes or the enemies. So when you are saying about World War III, so it reminds us about World War II. So there are sides, and every nation has to take side. Are you with the Hitler, or are you with the friends, the other axis? So are you, the US is trying to suggest that it is the time when world has to take sides?
I do absolutely think, and I know that President Biden has said the same thing, that it is critically important to clearly state where you stand. The White House spokesperson, Jen Psaki, yesterday said it best when she said, it's time to decide what side of history you want to be on. What we're facing here is a conflict between the community of democracies in the world who want to uphold the international norms that have been established since World War II. Norms such as the respect for sovereignty, the right to be able to defend one's borders, the expectation that disputes will be handled diplomatically and not through the use of force, rule of law, transparency. These are all of the values that the US and India have been working on very closely in the Indo-Pacific region, for example, and it is what we believe needs to be upheld in Ukraine. On the other side, you have an autocrat, Putin, who does not believe in rule of law. He does not believe in democracy. He doesn't believe in any of these values. He wants to overturn the international world order that has been established by the community of nations. And yes, it is time. It is important for every nation to decide what side of this history they want to be on.
So while the West Bloc is saying that Putin is dictator, he has a character of a dictator, while Putin has to say that this aggression is imposed on us, because when NATO is in expansion mode, I had no other option but to take an action. So what about this theory of Mr. Putin, that it's all because of the West Bloc, especially the US, who is one of the founding member of NATO, and that's why I need to take this severe action?
Well, first of all, I disagree with the characterization of the Western Bloc. It is the vast majority of the world, countries from all over the world, who are standing up for Ukraine and its people and its government. It is not just Western countries. With respect to NATO, let's be very clear. NATO is a defensive alliance. It represents a threat to absolutely nobody. And it is only Russia propaganda and the lies and misinformation that it's trying to put out in the world that is leading people to make this kind of statement. Moreover, there is a basic principle of international law and diplomacy that a country gets to decide what alliances, what partnerships, what relationships it wants to have. It is not for Putin to tell Ukraine or any other country around the world, no more than it would be for us, who they get to be a partner with. So when it comes to NATO, countries that choose to join NATO, it is their choice, it is their sovereign choice, and Putin doesn't get to decide on their behalf.
So while we are talking about this, there are also certain global situations, like why it is so that even after sanctions by the Western countries, especially by US, the stringent sanctions on Russia, still Putin is not giving any importance to those sanctions. Why it is so?
Well, first of all, the sanctions have only recently been imposed, and new sanctions are being imposed every single day, including, if I recall correctly, just yesterday, a decision to put sanctions directly on Putin. This is a coalition of over 30 countries that represent 1/2 of the world's economy that have decided to put sanctions on Russia. We are seeing on a daily basis the results that Russia is facing. The ruble has devalued, it's collapsed in value. Just today, as I was coming into this interview, I saw on TV that it looks likely that Russia is going to default on its foreign debt. Russian oligarchs and cronies, Putin's closest allies and friends, are facing their assets being seized, their private jets, their billion-dollar yachts being seized. So these sanctions are going to work. They are creating economic pressure, and they are creating a very difficult situation for Putin and his inner circle.
Is it something like that Russia must be counting on China, the way China is helping Russia on international fronts? And especially China is also saying, the Chinese premier is saying that we need to listen to Russia, what they have to say. So what's about the China, the Sino-Russian alliance?
We've been very clear that we expect that nobody is going to try to bail Russia out. And in so doing, any country that seeks to try to help Russia in its aggression, its unprovoked, it's premeditated and unjustified aggression against Ukraine, all they're going to do is prolong the suffering of the Ukrainian people, prolong the humanitarian crisis, exacerbate it, and also prolong what's increasingly a global economic problem, which is entirely a result of Putin's voluntary and unnecessary aggression. So we sincerely hope that nobody will help Russia, because to do so would only be to ally themselves with this aggression and prolong what is a completely unnecessary war and a completely unnecessary humanitarian crisis.
So, before I start questions related to India and India-US relations and India's peculiar position in this whole conflict, there is this question. So when there are interests of US, you are there in Afghanistan, you are there in Iraq or Iran, Middle East, or so many other parts of the world, including the other South Asian countries as well. And when there are interests of Russia, we can criticize the same. But why there are this politics of dualism? Why two parameters for two different countries?
Have you heard the expression, Prasanna, whataboutism? Russia is a master at whataboutism. In order to obfuscate what is a very simple story.
Whataboutery.
What about whatever it is? What about Iraq, as you just said? What about Afghanistan? This is a classic propaganda tool used by Russia to obfuscate.
But don't you think there is a logic? There is a logic about this for this whataboutery?
No, I do not. Absolutely not. The Russian aggression is unprecedented. There is drawing false equivalencies does not change the story that is in front of us right now. And that story is a clear story. There is nobody other than Putin who disagrees that he, in an unprovoked, premeditated, and unjustified fashion, has attacked his neighbor. Not you, of course, but Putin and his allies and propagandists can throw up all the smoke screens they want to try to change that reality. But that is the reality.
So if we are so much so against Russia and Putin, and US is so much so in arms with Russia that we are going to stop Russia at any cost, why you are not launching your own arm and people and army in Ukraine? They are asking for help. Honestly, I would hate to use that word. Why only lip service? Why not actual actions?
We are providing the support to the Ukrainian people and the Ukrainian government that we believe is necessary in order for them to defend themselves, while, as I said, doing everything we can to avoid this conflagration getting even worse. So when I say, or when the U.S. government says, no country should be supporting Russia to make this problem worse than it already is, we also want to see what we can do to resolve the problem. But let's be clear, the problem was caused by one person, and he can change it overnight. If Putin wants to withdraw from Ukraine, respect Ukrainian sovereignty, its territorial integrity, he can do so tomorrow. There is absolutely nothing that any of the rest of us can do that could so easily resolve the conflict. It is a conflict that he invented. It's a conflict that he could solve tomorrow if he wanted to.
Are we looking at an out-in-open nuclear conflict? Will it be translated into a nuclear conflict?
I am not going to speculate, and obviously those kinds of worst-case scenarios, which again I think are part of a Russian effort to make this situation seem far more complicated than it is and to scare people. It's a simple issue. A sovereign nation has been invaded. The international community cannot let that stand.
So coming back to the original the question which we were waiting for. So how you are assessing India's role? Because recently there were like the US was saying that India should take side. India should be more upfront about that. So how you are assessing India's role about that?
Well, I want to start off by underscoring that the U.S.-India partnership has never been stronger. It's been growing in leaps and bounds just in the last couple of years that I've been working closely on it. And over the last 20 years, it has transformed in ways that I think people would have thought unimaginable just a few years ago. We cooperate in every conceivable area of human endeavor, and our partnership on things like healthcare in the last couple of years, I'm not sure that the world would have been able to get through the pandemic I hate to say, because obviously it was a catastrophe for the world, but it could have been much, much worse if not for the areas in which the U.S. and India have cooperated. And there's nothing that Putin can do that's going to split up our relationship or our partnership. I will go back to what I said earlier, just to repeat my own president's statement, that every world leader needs to stand up right now. It is time now for every world leader to stand up to support the Ukrainian people and to condemn Putin's aggression.
So, while you are urging the world leaders to stand up and take sides, while India is having oil deal with Russia, it is a recent news now. How are you looking at that?
I'm not going to comment on those details. This is a strategic issue, and I think it's important to focus on the big picture and not focus on all of these small issues. We, the U.S. and India, if there are differences, we can work through them together. But all of these, my fear is that you lose the forest for the trees by talking about these issues. And I'm trying to focus on the forest. And I think it's really important for the Indian people to focus on the forest as well. There is a set of values and principles that India was founded upon. The U.S. is founded upon. We share two very similar constitutions. We believe in a certain set of international principles that we have both upheld at the UN. And we need to work together on these in Ukraine, just as he's worked on those same set of principles here in the Indo-Pacific region.
My last question, which is actually a Club 2 questions. So, last question, it's a Club 2 questions.
Okay.
So, the point 1.1 is, so can whether America is trying to understand the catch-22 situation of India? What's your take on that? And second, and the last question, 1.2, is what is way forward?
We always want to understand the perspective of our friends and partners. And it is obviously incumbent upon us to have those kinds of discussions and dialogues. There is no two friends who agree on everything. And obviously part of being a friend is to listen to each other and to understand each other's perspectives. And so clearly in our discussion with India, we listen to them and they listen to us. The way forward couldn't be any clearer. Putin needs to withdraw his forces from Ukraine. He needs to end this unjustified aggression. He needs to respect Ukraine's territorial integrity and its borders. And he needs to end what has become a massive humanitarian crisis, which is affecting the world's economy. And this is not a natural disaster. This is not a shock to the world's economy that we could not have predicted and could not have avoided, like the pandemic was. This was the action of an individual and a government that was completely avoidable. It was chosen by them, and they can choose to reverse it tomorrow.
Let the hope prevail. I can say that much, that the hope will prevail. And thank you, Mr. Ranz, for allowing this conversation and allotting your time, precious time, and thank you for the same.
Thanks, Prasanna. I appreciate the opportunity.
तर हे होते मिस्टर रॅन्झ, जे अमेरिकेच्या अतिशय उच्च पदावर आहेत. भारताच्या पश्चिम विभागाच्या US कॉन्सुल जनरलची जबाबदारी त्यांच्यावर आहे. आणि या संवादानंतर आपण इथेच थांबूयात. पाहत रहा साम TV.